Welcome to The People's View, a program dedicated to discussing local, state, and national issues and their effect on the American people. The People's View provides a platform for state representatives and national figures to present their viewpoint. Whether it's social, economic, or financial topics, you'll hear it on The People's View.
Hello, this is Representative Carl Seidel welcoming you to the People's View. Today, we're happy to have the Speaker of the House, Bill O'Brien. Bill, thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for having me, Carl. I always enjoy coming on your show.
Yes, this is a good time to tell everybody about what was accomplished up there for this whole year and what you look forward to in the coming year.
Sure, you know, and it certainly is hard to list everything we've done. We've passed, I think, if I have my count right, and you know, I'm a lawyer, so there's a reason to doubt my specific information, but I think it was around 289 bills that we passed. And you know, there's a number of bills that really do represent substantial accomplishments for the state. You know, the first couple of bills we passed were the budget. You know, there's the budget itself, and then what we call the trailer bill, House Bill 2. And the combination of those two bills allowed us to address, as we've talked so many times now, a substantial deficit, a structural deficit, which is basically that if spending had gone on at the rate it was going on, based upon the revenues that were going to come in, we would have had around a $900 million deficit. 895 million, I think, was very close to this specific figure. And we addressed that through spending reductions, as well as at the same time reducing some taxes that either weren't making sense or were suppressing job creation. And we didn't increase any taxes or any fees. We didn't enact any new taxes or new fees. And I think it's worked out pretty well. We're at the point now where we're just finishing out the first year of a two-year budget. And one of the things we're real proud about that budget is how carefully, and now we're shown to be accurately, estimating what the revenues will be. We're 1/10% off. We're just a little bit
I couldn't believe
over.
it was that close. You know, I mean,
you
that's
know,
amazing.
But
you did a lot of hard work.
Yeah, the expertise was there in terms of the legislative staff. We brought in economists and some legislators. Representative Norm Major from Kingston is just become a real expert in projecting state revenues, and you know, we're gratified. You know, some are up, some are down, but it's working out pretty well. And you know, as I've been mentioning to folks as I've talked to them about this whole process, sometimes it's what you're not talking about that is important as what you're talking about. Because if you remember the last couple of times that we've reached this one-year mark into the last two-year budgets, the discussion then was, oh, the revenues have missed, and who are we going to lay off? What additional revenue sources are we going to find? We found, you know, silliness such as assuming that there's $50 million worth of assets that the state can sell, so they plugged that in, and it turned out that $50 million turned out to be around $800,000, I think it was, in actual assets they could sell.
Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. It was. Even as we said at the time, we said this is just, you know, as my background is providing legal services in the software industry, we used to call it vaporware. You know, it's just that's an idea. It doesn't represent reality or anything that's ever going to happen. And so this time we were very, very careful, and the reductions were substantial, but they were carefully placed in place. You know, we reduced overall spending from about $11.5 billion to just a little over $10.3 billion. That's both federal and state-funded spending. And the state-funded portion of that spending, what we have to go to the voters and our neighbors and say, you know, give us more money if we're going to increase it, that we reduced 17.6%.
Wow.
And you know, I think the second part of what we did, and not only recognizing what the revenues are going to be, but in putting in place a budget, I think shows where we did it well, because we started asking questions such as what are core functions of government, and what are things that we would very much like to do but perhaps don't have to do, and what expectations and what dependencies have we placed on the people of New Hampshire based upon spending trends and things we've done in the past. And we carefully weighed those and came up with a budget that works.
And it seemed to work. You didn't hear any of those horror stories about what we were doing and denying people care and other things that occurred.
Yeah, and again, we're 1 year into it. We did hear some awfully harsh rhetoric, and I think it's playing out well now. We have a budget that has put in place, I think, the foundation for small businesses to grow in New Hampshire. If we had gone to the people of New Hampshire and said, we're going to cover that deficit through further tax increases, and as a matter of fact, based upon all that we're hearing that we have to now fund, we're going to continue the spending increases at the same rate that's been established over the last couple of budgets, we would have had to go to every person in New Hampshire, every woman and man and child, and say, give us $700 more to cover that. A family of four, works out to just about $3,000 that we would have had to go, and that's big money. That's the amount of money that many of us use to pay our utilities and heat for the year and all.
Or put into some retirement fund.
Put into a retirement fund, or fix your automobile, or replace the furnace. That's important money to people, and we didn't have to do that. And I think the results are beginning to show. We have been able to go from just under 6% unemployment down to 5%, actually before adjustment, 4.9% unemployment. And that isn't the type of decrease we see on the federal level where, the workforce is shrinking, so they're saying, oh, the percentage unemployment's going down as we kick people right out of the workforce if they can't find a job and stop counting them. Our workforce is increasing. We have 10,000 more of our New Hampshire neighbors who are working today than were working when we came into a majority. The unemployment number itself has gone down 4,500. That means a growing workforce. So, I think we are heading in the right direction. The tax decreases that we put in place are beginning to work. About 12 or so, I think we counted up for the first half of the term. We just overrode one of the governor's vetoes and put in place 8 more tax decreases that include, for example, in the business enterprise tax on payroll. We've expanded the small business exemption under it, so about a third of small businesses now won't have to pay that tax. That's going to allow them to invest in their businesses and to do what's most important to us, provide job opportunities for the people of New Hampshire.
And it's at that lower end, the smaller end, that you're really developing it.
Absolutely.
Those are the ones, once they get to a good nucleus, then they can grow.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. These are for the really smaller of the small businesses, and they can begin to grow. So, in terms of accomplishment, starting right off, I think we did that, and we're very proud, and we've had an opportunity now to see how it's playing out, and it's playing out very nicely. But other things have been necessary components of that. First half of the term, we passed 43 bills that, in big ways and smalls, reduced regulations on businesses, some regulation on us as individuals, and we've almost doubled it now, closing out the second half of the term, around 80 different bills that, in big ways and smalls, are reducing regulations, and not just in a sort of knee-jerk fashion, but going to smart regulation. The government has a place to make sure that workers in the marketplace and that consumers in the marketplace are being dealt with fairly. But we don't have to be an adversary for business, and too often that's been the case. One of the regulations that we changed was a regulation that allowed the Department of Labor to walk into a business and find a non-health and safety related violation and fine the business. There was an incident involving a company from the North Country that was found a couple of years ago to have 2 or 3 decades before that changed its payroll from weekly to bi-weekly, and Department of Labor found out about it and said, you should have notified us. Now we're going to fine you, a certain amount for each week that you'd gone through. And now no one was harmed by that. I'm not even sure why the Department of Labor even needed to know. But nonetheless, the law we put in place would say in that situation, warn the business. Warn means educate the business owner and his or her managers, and only then, if they don't correct the problem, will they be fined. If they walk in and find a poster's out of date or a form is filled out wrong or something like that, work with those business people as partners, because I know you've been involved in business, Carl. I put together a law firm with some friends of mine. We ended up, having, I think, 20 or so employees at one point. Even as a lawyer, running a business is a complicated thing. There's a lot of regulations. You want to do it right. You don't want to do it dishonestly. There's no percentage in it. The departments such as the Department of Labor should work with people in making them successful, or at least not destroying their success.
You're right. I had to live through that about 10 years ago in Texas. But Texas has a nice business climate. It was really good. But we grew. I was employee number 10, and in 2.5 years we had 120 employees.
Yeah,
so, but we were just able to do the things we wanted to do. Things went through quickly. We learned how to deal with the FDA, which is usually one hard group to deal with.
And if you're a large business, as you indicated, you can hire legions of lawyers and experts in various areas, and you have no problem understanding, learning about, understanding, and applying the regulations. But when you're at 10 employees, you're basically at that point just trying to get your business going or keep it going. And you shouldn't have as one of the potential business and job destroyers the state government.
Yeah.
And that is too often been the case. So we're real proud of what we've done in that area, and we intend to go forward and do that. One of the things that we found that was the systemic problem then, because and you and I have discussed this, I always try to seek out what the problem is in the system, because I think most people are hardworking and good, and the state employees I come across are good, hardworking people, but they respond to the system that they're in. And the system that they're in, if you work at the Department of Labor or Department of Insurance, is that your funding comes through fees and fines. And so if you walk into a business, you're thinking about the fact that, my department has to get funded.
Sure.
So one of the things we're looking at is to bring those agencies back into the general fund, to have their funding come out of the general state revenues, take their funding sources and put it into the general revenue. And at that point, the incentives change, and more importantly, their function is tested against other functions when you're putting the overall budget together.
Right. That's the wrong incentive to give them.
It is, and I saw it play out a little bit when we were putting together the budget. Some of these self-funded agencies kind of sat back, and as we're talking with others about their contribution to solving the deficit problem, those other agencies are sitting back saying, we're okay. Everything's okay over here. Well, it could well be that some program is more valuable or more necessary than what they're doing, yet we were left with having to impact that program in order to get the spending reductions that were needed.
Well, I think you made a point with the Department of Labor. As you know, you appointed me to this Commission on Rules and Regulations.
Yes.
And I've had some interactions with them. And one of the programs that they're really starting to organize, although it's a little slower than I would like to see it, is the education program. And they have some good ideas. I think they're learning as they go along to see what is working. I've invited them actually to come onto the shows to talk to people and maybe even use a tape of the show to use in their education program.
Yeah, and that's great, and that's the right incentives. That's exactly what they should be doing. Right. And business people, I think, will appreciate what they're doing. In terms of going forward in an area of helping business, obviously we have to we have to continue to look at what taxes are hurting job growth. We have to continue to look at regulations. One of the regulations that is really destructive of job creation in New Hampshire is the fact that we don't have a right to work state. We have a forced labor state where we require, particularly our public employees, but also private employees, to join unions that have perhaps been put in place in the private side people who are long gone from those companies. The end result is that we have a labor market that's much less dynamic. You know, we worked hard on it, and I'm sure you know about that, and a lot of your viewers know about that. Came close. You know, we had a real substantial votes in support of it in the House and the Senate. Governor Lynch vetoed it, and we didn't have quite enough to overcome the veto.
It was close.
It was very close, but you know, one of and you continue to get more information on this, as we do, we get more information that supports what we're trying to do here, and demands that we come back next term and try again, because Indiana, shortly after we weren't able to override the governor's veto, enacted a right-to-work law, and shortly thereafter, I think it was several days, Caterpillar announced they were closing up a union plant in Ontario and bringing it to Indiana. Now, of course, you know, no one could say we would have received that plant here in New Hampshire, but it would have been nice to be part of the discussion. It'd be nice to go out to companies like Caterpillar and some of the other companies that are being rumored to be placing big manufacturing plants across the country and say, you know, you don't have to put those plants down in Kentucky and North Carolina and South Carolina. You know, there's a place here, a great place too, if we continue with the fact that we have no personal income tax. You know, that combination of no sales tax, no income tax, right to work would put our economy into hyperdrive. And the other bit of information we've learned is that since Indiana did that, 1 out of every 8 new jobs created in this country have been created in Indiana. And
That's
you know,
pretty quick.
It really is quick results.
Well, look what happened in Wisconsin too. If you look at the,
Yeah.
it wasn't a right to work, but it was a change in the what they could do in their agreements.
Well, that's right, and it freed up public employees there to make the choice substantially whether they want to be part of a union or not, and many chose not to. Many may still choose to. This was never anti-union. There's a place for
That's what,
unions.
Yeah, the people didn't understand. They kept saying that we were going to destroy their bargaining rights. The only bargaining right was the monopoly that they had on the workers.
Right. You know, I always think about the argument that one of our colleagues, Representative Steve Winter, who had been Secretary-Treasurer of a labor union, an airline pilots union out of Texas, which is a right-to-work state, and he argued how even though the membership of the companies didn't have to, the employees of the companies where they had contracts didn't have to join, they had 99% participation because they were a great union focused in on their memberships rather than focused in on union bosses who had ideological goals outside of the union. That's too often what we see happen here. And so it would be good for New Hampshire, and particularly for New Hampshire's young people. You know, one of the statistics that came out of the census that was very discouraging to some of us is that while New Hampshire grew slightly over the decade of 2000 to 2010, in absolute numbers, we fell in the age group of 25 to 34. Those are the young people, you know, just out of school, first few years of employment, and they're leaving New Hampshire to find those first jobs. And it's because we're not putting together good manufacturing jobs that those folks can, those younger people can get and start their careers. We will be intent next time in bringing that forward.
Good. I think that's something that the state really needs. And we had Fred Coker on from the New Hampshire High Tech Council, and they're working on something to keep people in right out of college, starting businesses.
And that's good.
And
you know, one of the areas that I want to start to look at is our community colleges.
Yes.
We did cut back the operating expense funding for the university system by 50%, and there's good reasons, even in good times, to be very leery of, as government, in funding some of these state colleges because they have, in their tuition increases, vastly exceeded what inflation is. And I think it is because of overinvestment by government is skewing their mission and how efficiently they're providing their services to their students. One area we do a great job in New Hampshire, though, is with our community colleges.
Yes,
And there's where I think our investment as it grows in education should grow. And that's going to help out business as well, because when I go around the state talking to some of the smaller businesses, 10 to 50, 70 employees, 75 employees, I'm finding that, certainly taxes are an issue, certainly regulation is an issue, but availability of a trained workforce is also an issue. The jobs that are out there now are very require very highly educated employees, and we have to start setting up apprenticeship programs more than we've done through community colleges. We have to start partnering with businesses. We have to be able to move some of the folks through the 2 years of a community college and provide them then help them get their first job. Community colleges do a great job.
They do.
They in some instances provide the first 2 years of college at $4,000 or $5,000 a year rather than the $16,000 a year that UNH is charging for tuition.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. We did the capital budget for the community colleges, and they came in with a beautiful plan this year. I mean, I think it was the easiest thing that our committee had to do. But we gave them everything they wanted because they had a plan. They participated with some of their own money. It wasn't just state money. And they were continuing to look where to do it next. They have an automotive repair system that goes in there. Now they're educating for a number of car companies.
I went over to Nashua Community College and spoke with some of the folks over there, and I was really impressed about how they're constantly reaching out to the business community and asking them, where are you going? Where do you need workers? Because they know that their mission is to get particularly younger people, but also people in career transition back into the workforce. And they're very focused in on that. I went over and talked to the university trustees at the point we were considering the 50% reduction. And they invited me over to talk with them. And part of what they did to convince me that we were wrong is they put a bunch of kids behind me as I was giving my talk to them to express their disagreement. But nonetheless, I spoke with them and I said, I went to a public college. And when I went to college, and Carl, I'm going to reveal kind of my ancient lineage here, but I went 40 years ago. And when I started college, it was $350 a year. And that sounds like a little bit of money now. It was not too much then, but it required some doing to get it up. And I had to work full time to both live and pay my college tuition, but I was able to do it. And that college understood its mission was to educate younger people who could only afford to go to a public school, but had the drive to work and earn the money to do it. And before I went over to talk to the university chancellors and trustees, I did sort of an inflation run on that 350, bring it up through, in this case it was back in 2011 when I talked with them. And I found out that the tuition should be, if it was just inflation adjusted, about $2,200 a year. And and so I thought, well, maybe there's something extraordinary going on in that college. So I went and looked up and asked what was the average college tuition in 1970 in public universities. It was $450. And somebody had anticipated me because they said in 2011, I can't remember, it would be about $2,300, $2,400, something like that. I went and talked to him and I said, you've lost your mission. Your mission was to allow a younger person, as I was in those days, who was desperate to get a college education and wanted to get, in my case, law school or go to business school or go to dental school, and allow us that ability to move forward without devastating us financially. And I said, now you don't even call yourself a college. You call yourself a research institution. And you're not charging $2,400, $2,500 a year. You're charging $16,000 a year. And you're leaving New Hampshire students with some of the, I think it is actually the highest per student average debt coming out of college in the country. And I said, you've lost your mission. They talk about how they have, I think it's the biggest wind tunnel in some expanse of land east of the Mississippi. And I said, that's great. I'm glad somebody has the biggest wind tunnel in that expanse. But you're asking us to contribute to help out our constituents, and God bless you, but they don't need the biggest wind tunnel. They need the 2011 Bill O'Brien really needs an education without being financially devastated to have a place to go, and you're not providing it.
Well, when we did their capital budget too, they came to us with what I thought was a poorly laid out plan. But not only that, we also considered the fact that, I guess a week or two before they made their presentation, the faculty turned down a 4.5% raise.
Right.
That wasn't enough.
Completely unrealistic.
We were trying to keep everybody down at 1%.
Completely unrealistic. So they didn't like the message I was giving them. It might have been a little bit more pointed than yours, Carl, because I said, you know, you're not going to like to hear it, but your workers, you call them professors, are unproductive. They're working 6 or 8 hours a week. People work more than that. I said, your product, the service you're providing to your customers, your students, is too often of dubious value. You have a philosophy department that someone told me that 2 or 3 years ago has, I want to get this right, I'm pretty sure it's 4 full-time professors working, and he graduated 3 philosophy majors. You know, you're not looking at how to best provide service to the young people of New Hampshire and people who want to, and later in life, get a degree when they're in transition. I said, you know, correct your problems, and we'll be back to help you out. And it could be that we're guilty as you are, because we've allowed you to become this unproductive by giving you so much money that you can use foolishly.
They expected it. That's the attitude that we read into their proposal.
Right.
But before we end the interview, we'd like to talk about some of the veto overrides that we accomplished just recently.
Well, you know, Governor Lynch vetoed a large number of bills, and as a consequence, there was a large number of overrides. I can't remember exactly where we are. I think we're at 14 or 15 overrides for the term, a large number at any rate, many more than any other governor in memory. And it's because he override bills that I think are understood by New Hampshire voters as being real real advancements, you know, and just necessary bills. You know, for example, one of the bills that he vetoed and we override the veto on was one that would provide individuals who have been subject to harmful medical malpractice but not huge cases, the type of cases that don't attract lawyers because they're just not valuable enough, to have a voluntary opportunity to participate in a settlement system. One that is monitored by a neutral hearing officer to make sure that the settlement offer is fair. It opens up a cost-effective, non-judicial way to allow those folks who have an injury that may be only worth $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 to nonetheless be compensated, because most attorneys, you know, and I used to practice in this area of personal injury law, and both on the defense side and on the plaintiff side, most attorneys won't take medical malpractice cases unless they're worth it. You know, depending on the law firm and how big it is, $150,000 to $250,000, because it costs a lot of money to handle those cases. And Governor Lynch vetoed that, and we overrode that veto. He vetoed a bill, and this is inexplicable, that would have continued to allow us to bring some reforms on the taxation of trust companies. We're developing a reputation that we have sought out as being a destination jurisdiction for trust companies.
Oh, really?
And you know, so we wanted to make a change that would say out-of-state trustees of those companies, which are bringing employees here, aren't going to be subject to the interest and dividends tax, which again would allow more jobs to come to New Hampshire. And these are great jobs. You know, these are jobs for professionals and investment professionals. He vetoed it, and we had to override the veto on that. And a couple of other important bills that I think most people understand are good for New Hampshire. One is photo ID for voters. You know, We have been subject to somewhat of a minor embarrassment here in New Hampshire when it was shown on television that individuals during our presidential primary could walk into polling stations, mention the name of someone who had recently been deceased, and be handed a ballot. Not even ask for the ballot, just mention the name. And now we'll have a requirement that they show a photo ID with an out there, an affidavit out. So if someone says, I don't have one, I forgot it today, I don't have enough assets to pay the $10 to the DMV to get a driver's license ID, that they can nonetheless vote. But there's some integrity now. We know who's going to be voting. And then one that's very important, I think, is this tax credit we are going to allow businesses to put money into a nonprofit corporation that will give scholarships to primary and secondary students to go to private schools. You know, it's great if you have the assets to go to those schools, if your parents are affluent, but if you're middle class or working class people, or if you're blessed with a lot of children, you have a great job, but you're blessed with a lot of children, it is impossible for them to have those options. And I think school choice is one of the ways that we're going to systemically improve education for our young children in this society. And this begins that. Governor Lynch seems to think that education begins and ends with government-run schools. And some public schools provide a great service. Many do provide a great service. But parents should have the choice, and students should have the choice. And even though the scholarships may only be $2,500, in many instances, with private schools matching those and parents coming up with $500 or $1,000 to help out, you can give kids some real opportunity to get a great education. So, that's important. I disappointed that the governor vetoed that, and I'm just thrilled that both in the House and the Senate there was a great support for it and substantial majorities to override those vetoes. So, that's some real progress that we've been making.
Good.
We overrode on Wednesday 8 out of the 11 bills that came in front of us that the governor had vetoed. 7 of them became law. One of them, the Senate didn't override the veto. We've ended the session with a great legacy of accomplishment, and it includes those bills.
Now that you have a legacy, in the last few minutes, what are we going to be doing for next year?
Yeah, we really do have to begin to look at a number of different things. One is continued review of regulations to ensure that we're regulating smartly and not to suppress business activity mindlessly. We have to look at how government is run. We reduced spending, as I said, from $11.5 billion down to just around $10.3 billion. There's no reason that we can't have a target of $10 billion being enough. And it's not a substantial reduction, but it requires us to have a goal that will compel us to look at how can government be more effective? Where can we look at privatization opportunities? Where can we look at opportunities such as we realized by putting managed Medicare in place, where we're providing better service for those who are getting Medicaid and yet saving money while we're doing it? Where can we look at reforms such as we put in place for the judiciary system this year, where there's a number of employees are coming down while the service is getting better? We've reduced the number of employees somewhere between 75 and 100 employees in the judiciary system. But again, we talked about the news you're not hearing. Do you remember the last couple of terms? There were these juryless months where the court system said we can't have jury trials, we don't have enough money. Well, we haven't been substantially increasing the budget over there, and yet through these efficiencies, we have jury trials every month now, and you will not hear during this budget that ever occurs. And we did it smartly through the Collins Center, through the circuit court, where we consolidated 3 court systems into one, allowing judges to travel around, through video conferencing of arraignments and other hearings where witnesses don't have to be brought in. These are the type of things that we have to continue to look at in part through what you're doing as on the committee that you've been put on to look at regulations, that we can have a government that works more efficiently. We have to break down the silos between agencies and consolidate
right, yeah.
functions. And so there's a lot that we are targeting, a lot we're going to do. The gains we've made are substantial. They're fragile. They can be reversed if we don't get back in, but they can be made transformative if, in fact, we get up there and we put some of these structural reforms in place.
I think the work done by the Justice Department was very good and should be shown to others what can be done. And the people are very happy. You were there at their opening demonstration. They're finding out about problems that they didn't get communicated before.
You know, there's two agencies when we put together the budget that we increased their spending. One was the Department of Correction, and the other was the Judiciary, because they came to us and said, here's our plan, and here's how it's going to save money, and, here, and equally importantly, is how it's going to provide better service for the people of New Hampshire. So we invested several million in them implementing that plan. They came to us and said it's a 10-year plan. We said do it in 30 days, and they did it in 30 days, and it's working well. And it's going to save. I fully believe their projections over the next 10 years it'll save $30 million. We're looking for opportunities to do those things.
Well, I'm sure we have them, and we look forward to doing that in 2013.
Well, thank you,
Thank
Carl.
you very much. And thank you, audience, for listening in. This is The People's View. It's sponsored by the Nashua Republican Committee, and we have our meetings on the second Thursday of every month in the Crown Plaza. Please look on the website at nashuagop.org and hear about the programs that we have and the connections to other sites that may inform you about the political happenings here in the state of New Hampshire. Thank you for listening in, and thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Hello, this is Carl Seidel, and welcome to The People's View. We're continuing our discussions. Now we have the President of the Senate, Senator Bragdon. Welcome aboard.
Oh, good to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Like we did last time, let's hear what happened to the Senate this last year, and what did you feel you accomplished? What were your greatest accomplishments? And then we'll talk later on about what you're going to do next year.
Okay. Well, this year we continued on basically with the theme that we had for the prior year as well. That is the things that are on the voters' minds, and the most important things to the voters are spending and taxes and jobs and the economy. And we tried to make that our focus, as you and your listeners know. The first year we solved an $800 million budget gap without increasing taxes. In fact, we repealed a number of fees and taxes that the Democrats had put in place when they were in charge for 4 years. So goal number one this year was to make sure we didn't get back into some of the same habits that got us into that problem in the first place, that being spending more money than we had. So we kept a very careful eye on the budget, both in terms of the spending side and also the revenue side, because one thing the Democrats had done is they made wild estimates as to what the revenue was going to be to make it match how much they wanted to spend. We adopted, along with the House, conservative revenue estimates, and we kept our eye on that to make sure they were on target, and they pretty much were. So we made sure our revenues were good, and we made sure we didn't spend more money than we had already budgeted for, and I think we were very successful in that. So that was one major area in this second year. The other major area in the second year was continuing one from the first year, that being jobs in the economy. Really, the first year of the two-year session is dominated by the budget, and you try to get a few other things done at the same time. In the second year, the bigger focus was on the jobs in the economy piece and then keeping an eye on the budget piece. So we were able to continue our work trying to create an environment in New Hampshire that is good for businesses, that will help businesses grow, help businesses succeed. It's successful businesses that hire people, and when we have 30,000 to 40,000 people in New Hampshire unemployed, then we need to find ways to help companies hire people, and the way to do that is to create an environment where they can succeed. So we passed a number of laws that will help encourage companies to grow, invest in their operations, or maybe reduce their taxes a little bit so they can spend a little more money hiring people than on paying the government. So I think we were successful in those areas as well. So those were the key areas that we focused on in the second year, is keeping an eye on the budget, and then as well trying to make a good environment for businesses.
And from what I've heard, we did, in the last 2 years, we've done more where the Senate and the House worked together on some of these projects.
Yeah, absolutely. There were, I think, everybody that came in 2010 really understood that the biggest issues were jobs in the economy and state spending and taxing. And we certainly had different ideas of how to get there, and when you get out to the outer edges of the issues, you get differing opinions. But we all had that as our core belief. And so getting to a point where you could compromise on those and put things forward, I think, was very, very important. We were also able to get together and put a constitutional amendment before the people to ban an income tax. And so there were plenty of things we did that worked together. I know the press likes to look for conflict.
Yes.
And so if they saw me going up the stairs and Bill O'Brien taking the elevator one day, you know, they would write about there must be a conflict because Bragdon took the elevator and O'Brien took the stairs. And it was probably more the fact that I'm just lazier than Bill is. So yep, they look for conflict where they can find it. But in reality, we accomplished a lot. And yesterday overrode about a half a dozen vetoes.
Right.
It had been about 20 years since the governor's veto had been overridden. And so far, I think last year we overrode 8 of them, and this year I think we overrode 6. So we've overrode 15 vetoes in the last 2 years. So I think we worked together quite well.
Yes, and it's not just that the leadership, but the committees are working together a little bit better.
I think,
too,
yep,
right?
I think it seemed, you know, we had a lot of new people coming in 2 years ago, a lot of new chairmen, a lot of new leadership, and it took a little while, but I think towards the end there especially, the committees were working well together and talking with each other and going back and forth.
Well, it helped that some of them were on the House side before they got elected senators.
Yes, yes.
But,
so I think the chairmen were very good at talking with their counterparts in the House, and there was a good two-way communication there.
Well, what do you feel was the hardest thing for you to get to accomplish this year, and why?
Well, I think the most difficult thing, and it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be, but when you have a very large majority, 19 members, let me start with when you're in the minority, you learn to stick together. For 4 years, the Republicans were in the minority. For the last 2 of those years, I was the minority leader. And when you're in the minority, you stick together. You're unified. You try and have the same theme. And it's a lot about teamwork. When you get to be in the majority, there is the temptation, at least, to start to fracture and have different groups going in different directions. And suddenly, although you have the majority, you actually don't have enough votes to get things done because the unified minority will pick off people here and there. So the something that was, I guess it wasn't overly difficult, but it was something I had to keep an eye on, was trying to keep the team together operating as a team and understanding that our goal was to put forth the major initiatives that we have in order to be able to really retain the majority, because when we get back in the minority, if we were to get back in the minority, then the folks who like to tax and spend would get back in charge, and all the hard work that we've done would be undermined in a very short period of time. So it was just something I needed to really keep an eye on, is trying to keep the team together and understanding that, you know, there were 19 of us and we wouldn't always agree all the time. But as I said to them, and I'm paraphrasing from someone who served on the school board with me in Milford, that if there's 19 of us and we all agree on everything all the time, then 18 of us aren't needed. So the dissension and differences of opinion is good, but you know, let's leave it there and then move on to other things when there are differences. And so this has been historic, having 19 members of one party in the Senate. And those who served when it was 18 said it was very difficult keeping them together. You had the conservatives, you had the moderates. I'm certainly a conservative, but you know, I know how to work together and how to get people all pulling in the same direction and you know, be able to work with each other when all is said and done.
Work out a common solution that people can accept.
Exactly, exactly. Or if it goes against them, then okay, pick up the pieces and move on to the next issue. I mean, you're not going to win every vote that you cast in the legislature. You learn that pretty quickly. And so lick your wounds and move on to the next issue.
So this coming election, you're going to have a number of new people elected in some of the Senate.
We're guaranteed, I think, 9 new senators, because we have and I lost count here. I think we have oh no, we have 2 Democrats and 6 or 7 Republicans not running again. Senator Sanborn had to resign because he moved to Bedford to run from that district. And so, but we have, guaranteed 9 or so vacancies to which there'll be a new senator. That'll be, this year we had 12 freshmen. Many of those were people who defeated incumbents. We know right now we're going to have at least 9 freshmen. And then, who knows what happens. There's always, always interesting things happen in elections. Hopefully nothing too interesting happens in my district, but I'll be working hard to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, we're concerned here in Nashua because obviously Senator Lambert is not running again. And so we'll have a new one in there. And we have one of our House people running from the Republican side. So
yes, and I must say, by the way, Senator Lambert and Senator Luther have been great members of the Republican team up in Concord, and have worked real hard to get things done. We'll certainly miss Senator Lambert, and we'll work real hard to make sure Senator Luther comes back.
I think he will too. I hope so. What are you looking forward to next year? Is your game plan going to change in any way?
Well, I think some of the themes, in fact, the predominant themes are the same. We need to keep an eye on the budget to make sure, one, we don't get back into the same problems that put us where we were before. And I think with the Republican majority, we can do that. It will be a critical budget time because I suspect money from the federal government will be less available than it has been in the past. And so there will still be hard decisions that have to be made in terms of what programs are necessary and how we're going to fund them, because there won't be as big a supply of outside money as there had been in the past. And we're not going to be able to raise fees and taxes on New Hampshire residents to be able to make up the difference. So we're going to have to take a look at, obviously we need to see first how much we have, but then it's going to require some more difficult decisions. And I think everybody kind of understands that. And then secondly, continue on with looking for ways, again, to help businesses succeed. I ran a very successful software business after I got out of college, put the business on the Inc. 500 list of fastest growing companies in the country. So I certainly know how it is to sit in that seat of the business person and try and make decisions, and knowing how the governmental and tax policy really affects a lot of business decisions. So I think we need to continue looking at that and finding ways to help businesses succeed in New Hampshire. And finally, I think people expect us to do everything we do with a great deal of transparency and ethics, and just try and strengthen some of those laws, some of the transparency efforts that we've undergone lately of putting the state checkbook online. And those initiatives will keep on going as we get more and more digital connectivity with the state government operations.
Do you see any particular area of the state government that needs improvement? Or?
Well, I think there's always room for improvement in any organization. I serve on a committee that's called the Legislative Performance Audit Oversight Committee. And there's a branch of the legislature that is made up of auditors and accountants. They do about 2 major audits a year. Right now they're working on audits of the Corrections Department. There has not been a full-scale audit of the Corrections Department in 20 years. And just looking at, are they operating efficiently and using the money effectively in how they, in their personnel operations especially. That's a very large organization within the state. And without some kind of audit, it's just hard to tell whether or not they're operating as efficiently as possible. So the goal of that particular committee is to charge the auditors with a direction to take. So they're just finishing up their audits of corrections. Their next audit is going to be on the Department of Revenue regarding uncollected taxes. Are we doing a good job chasing down the money that people legitimately owe the state of New Hampshire? What can we do to improve? And then in the queue for audits next are the Department of Juvenile Justice, which is a very large organization within the Department of Health and Human Services. And are they efficiently and effectively managing that program for best results and best bang for the buck? And there's one more issue in the queue, and that is relating to contracting. Is the state contracting in an efficient manner when they make the decision between hiring contractors or hiring people? Are they making that right decision? Are they using guidelines and decision-making processes that yield good results? It's not always the best thing to do to hire a contractor. Sometimes you want to have someone in-house, and there's various decisions that have to be made along the way, and there's really never been an audit of how that is done. Is it being done effectively? So those audits each take about 6 months. It actually takes probably about $250,000 to $300,000 in man hours to complete a full audit like that. And so they are time consuming, but we want to focus them on areas of the state that spend a lot of money, because if you're going to invest $300,000, you know, we're not going to study whether we have the right furniture behind our desks in the committee rooms. We need big ticket items. So
Does that committee you're on actually follow up to see whether?
Well, what happens is we make a recommendation to another committee called the Fiscal Committee, which is a permanent committee within the legislature. And then those recommendations are approved, and then a report comes back to the Fiscal Committee that gives numerous observations and recommendations. And then those reports are then forwarded on to the chairman of the specific committees within the House and the Senate that deal with that. So I'm trying to think of the most recent one. There was a recent one on the lottery, and so that would be forwarded to the Ways and Means Committee to see if there's follow-up that needs to be done there. I will say that was something that when the Democrats were in charge, that they put that policy in place. It used to be those reports would come to the Fiscal Committee and then get filed away, and nobody really did much with them. One of the things the Democrats did is they put the policy in place that it gets sent to the committee in the legislature to look at, and then the commissioner would have to be answered to that committee in terms of, okay, are you following up on these recommendations? So a little heat was put on the commissioners to.
Well, I was wondering how the committee chairman, because the one incident that I ran into in my first term, 2009, I happened to sit in on an audit report of HHS, okay, and they had 30-some observations. And the committee chair asked the commissioner, or I guess it was the assistant commissioners there, what are you acting on? And this is, we can't get to it. We don't have enough people to do it. Our budget's cut. And that's it. That ended the conversation. And I was just surprised that there was no formal way of going after the committee that had been audited to see why they couldn't look at some of them anyway.
Yeah, exactly, and it's interesting to see, because some of the audits come back with a number of recommendations, and some of the auditees, honestly, their attitude I don't think is very helpful. They say we disagree with your conclusions, and we'll do what we want unless someone tells us otherwise. Whereas other auditees, their response is, "Thank you for pointing these out. We didn't realize this was an issue, and we will do everything we can as soon as possible to fix it." And you can pretty much tell when that report is presented to the Fiscal Committee, on which I sit, the head of the department is there as well. And you can pretty much tell just from their body language and their answers to questions, whether they're going to be a help or a hindrance in this. So, so it's an interesting, gives an interesting perspective on government, and encourage any legislator to ask to be on that committee.
Well, I learned a lot my first year looking into some of these things, and one of the other things that I was proposing is to have sort of a review. Any contract over $50,000 was evaluated for how well the vendor performed. Was it on time, under budget, et cetera, and to add a column to that spreadsheet they have on all contracts that are, which sort of said, okay, this customer has an evaluation, and therefore anybody who wanted to deal with that contractor could look up his history.
That's true. Yeah.
I couldn't get it through.
Huh. That didn't even make it over to the Senate. So
it didn't even make it in a committee.
Oh, really?
No, the commissioner for that department said that we needed more people and more time.
Okay, yeah.
And with a fiscal note on it, I said, I won't even submit that bill like that.
Yeah.
Because I had gone through the Attorney General and some lower level people who handled this spreadsheet and everything, and the thing was simple, and it really didn't need that, but somehow it was killed.
One of the things that was surprising to me when I became a part of this audit oversight committee was how expensive, for the full-blown audits, how expensive they were. And so quickly realized when people wanted to investigate agencies that were spending $10,000, well, and it costs $300,000, you're going to have a hugely long payback time on that. So have had to focus on the bigger issues. But
Yeah.
yes, there are a number of simple things like that that you would think that would be helpful.
But I had a couple of the smaller agencies up there say, you know, that really would help us because they don't have the wherewithal to even check with other agencies.
Yep.
But, well, anyway, I think there's some management techniques that could be adopted by, I mean, you ran a company,
Right.
I ran a company, and we know how you organize people to get things done.
And there is a difference between private sector operations and governmental operations, but you know there are some key differences, but there are a lot of similarities too. And a lot of it really is hiring the right people to do the work. And if you get the right people, then you have less to worry about. Within a bureaucracy in a large state organization with political appointees, you know, it becomes a little more complicated, I guess. Is a good
I
way to put
imagine
it.
it does. I imagine it does. Have you had an opportunity to see what they did over the Justice Department with their call center?
No, I was just reading an article about it today,
Oh, yeah.
and they had one meeting there that I was not able to make, but I was just reading an article about it today in some judicial trade magazine, and it seemed to be something very well received. And,
Very well, very
it's
well
that type of
organized.
thing that businesses have been doing
That's
for
right.
years that state government is finally getting around to doing. So.
Yeah, I think they did a wonderful job. I was over there for their show and tell.
Yep, that must have been the meeting that I missed.
Yeah, and they were even surprised with the results that they got. By having it all centered, people were exchanging problems that they hear about.
Oh, right.
And coming up with solutions.
Yeah, before you had people answering the phones in 50 or so
Oh, yeah.
different courts around the state, and now they're all in one place, and yeah, just collaborating with each other. I think the Department of Transportation and the Judiciary have these call centers now, and I think the next initiative would be to expand that to other state agencies.
I was very impressed with that emergency call center at the Department of Transportation.
Yep.
Have you been over there?
Yes, I have been
is
to that one, yep.
That is
Yep.
amazing. I didn't realize we had something.
And that's one of those things that can be done, you know, pretty much anywhere.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you're really hurting for jobs up in the North Country. You know, certainly with a little bit of technology, it's easy to set something up there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, and it provides savings for the state budget. So there are things we can do to make our government operate more efficiently without affecting services to people. In fact, improving the level of service to people.
Okay. Do you see that happening in the next 2 years?
I think so. There's a very large committee meeting right now up until November looking at exactly those issues to make a report to the legislature.
Really? Good.
Probably in time for our budget deliberations and in time for the new governor. No matter what happens, there'll be a new governor.
Yeah.
And to make recommendations for the governor to include in the budget for the coming biennium. So it has the potential to save us quite a bit of money.
Good. Well, anything else that you see different coming up?
No, I think that those are going to be the big issues. I think obviously we'll have to figure out some reaction with the Supreme Court case regarding the Affordable Care Act. Although in reality, when it all boils down to is it's a federal issue, and we need to make sure we have the right people in Congress and in the White House and in our governor's office to make sure that those types of things happen the way we think they should.
Well,
and that's probably my job from now to November is make sure some of those things happen.
it's our job to get everybody elected so we have a Republican governor.
That'd be a good thing. That'd be a good
Then
thing.
we wouldn't have to worry about the vetoes.
Yeah,
as
we
much,
wouldn't have,
huh?
exactly, we wouldn't have to veto so many bills that are good for business. So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this time, and I appreciate your input, and we'll have you back and after the election and see what the plan is to implement some of these ideas we've been
Thank you for
talking
having me
about.
back. Glad to be
Thank
here.
you again.
All right, great. Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
All right.
And thanks for listening to us. This is The People's View, sponsored by the Nashua City Republican Committee. And if you look at our website at nashuagop.org, you'll see all the events. We have a meeting every second Thursday of the month in the Crown Plaza at 6:30. So tune in again. Thank you very much for listening to us. Thank you.